and welcome to Macy Cooks. I started shooting this video and realized that my phone was flipped the other direction on the tripod, threw off the whole ratios, and took me like 10 minutes to figure out why I looked so different. I'm gonna show you. All I did was flip the camera and somehow this is completely different. I don't like it. Not a fan. Today we are making something that I have had so many requests for and so many private messages asking, Macy, please, when are you going to make it? It is a sourdough starter. If you know anything about starter, then you understand that it takes several days to create a sourdough starter. So the way this video is going to work is it's going to be broken up into each and every step, day by day, of the feeding and also the removal of the starter. With that, let's go over what you're going to need. First, let's talk about the vessel that you choose to grow your sourdough starter in. Now, this is extremely important. You want to make sure that this vessel is something sturdy, also food grade safe, and that it has high enough sides that as the starter builds and expands, is not in danger of spilling over. One reason in particular that I love this vessel is because it is clear, so it allows me to see the progress of my starter. As you can see, it still has some little indicators from my original sourdough starter. Also, this has a lid, which is very important. Now, the lid doesn't have to be airtight. In fact, you don't really want it to be. So you could have something that doesn't have a lid and just simply lay a clean hand towel over the top, or even some foil that you bend over so it can vent. Next up, a kitchen scale. If you've been holding off on getting a kitchen scale, now might be the time. I will tell you that before I had a kitchen scale, I thought, why do I need that kitchen scale? Well, I'll tell you why. Precision. Look, when it comes to grandma's recipes like cupcakes and cookies, you can eyeball it. And let's face it, a lot of times, even if the measurements aren't perfect, it's going to come out delicious. Something that won't come out delicious is bad bacteria. And I will tell you that with a starter for sourdough, you want to make sure that you're precise with your measurements. Because if you don't, then it's not going to taste good. And worse off, you could put in all the work to build it and then it not even work. One little neat thing about mine is that it has this pull-out to allow for larger bowls on the surface, which is kind of exciting. Also, it measures in kilograms and also ounces. I will link it in the description. And finally, probably the most important, is some good whole wheat or rye flour. Now, once we have this sourdough established, you can feed it with all-purpose any day of the week, no problem. But whenever you're starting the starter, you really want to give it the best jumping off place that you can. The reason you want to choose a whole wheat or a rye is that whole wheat or rye flour contains more nutrients that sourdough needs to grow and to flourish. All-purpose flour, though great for baking, does not contain those nutrients that it needs in order to produce the good bacteria that we're looking for. I go with King Arthur whole wheat flour. First things first, add 113 grams or a scant cup, which means just slightly under a cup, of whole wheat flour. Another thing that I find super important to mention here is make sure that the vessel you're going to grow the sourdough in is extremely clean, and that all the tools that you're going to be using are clean, and that your kitchen is clean. Because think of it this way, you're kind of growing a bacteria here. Do we want to add good bacteria in or bad bacteria? I mean, the last thing you want is remnants of last night's dinner in your sourdough. To that whole wheat flour, we are going to add 113 grams or just under a half a cup of cool water. Water temperature matters. If your house is like mine and runs a little bit on the cold side, you may need to bring the temperature of the water up a little. Not warm, but just closer to room temperature. If your house is regularly hot, then the cool water will be fine. Also, while we're talking about temperature, when we're storing this sourdough, while we're growing it, before it's ready, before it goes into the fridge, but while we're growing it, you need to keep in mind where you're placing it. Don't put it next to a window if it's cold outside. You want to put it in a warmer place. I've read about some people storing it on top of their hot water heater inside of a closet, or up inside the top shelf in a cabinet, just someplace that's going to be generally the same temperature and not fluctuating. Once we've introduced the water to the flour, take a large, long spoon and start mixing. You want to try to incorporate as much air into that as you can. You want to make sure that you are frothing it and that every single little grain of whole wheat flour is saturated with water. No one's getting away from me. Not dry, at least. Alrighty. Now that we got our mixed, we're going to take our lid or whatever you're placing on top of it, foil, hand towel, whatever, and set it to the side until tomorrow. Now the reason we're waiting 24 hours is we're giving those natural bacteria a chance to eat and start to build yeast. I'm going to put her in the cabinet, tuck her in for the night, and then I'll see y'all right here tomorrow. Hello and welcome back to day 2. I have retrieved my starter from its resting place, and after one day there is not a ton of growth. There's not a ton of growth. And that's very normal. After the first 24 hours, don't expect to see a whole bunch, maybe some bubbling, maybe even some liquid sitting on the top. Now the smell, it's a little bit yeasty, but not really any of those aromatic flavors that we're looking for. You're certainly not getting any like fruitiness or anything like that. I would expect that further down in the process, maybe closer to day 3 or day 4. Now, what we are going to do at this step is we are going to remove half of the contents of this starter, or 113 grams, and trash it. Now, I know that seems super wasteful and pretty counterproductive, but there's 2 reasons why we have to remove starter in order to replace it. The first reason, pretty self-explanatory, is if you keep feeding this every day without removing any of it, that's going to be a huge starter to have to maintain, and I mean, you're probably not going to use that. By removing half the contents of this starter and replacing it with new flour and new water, you're giving the yeast that's already building in there more to eat. You're eliminating part of that yeast population and giving it more to eat. So therefore, you're enhancing it and making it a stronger starter. Okay, now I have my kitchen scale zeroed out with a bowl on top so that I can measure out precisely 113 grams of this starter. Now that we have the discard measured out, set it to the side, and then grab a couple more bowls so we can measure out our ingredients. Here's my scale. I'm going to place a bowl on top. As you can see, that bumps it up to 124 grams. We're going to zero it out, and then we are going to start adding flour to that bowl until we get to 113 grams. You may think that seems a little bit self-explanatory, but I did this to show you a point, which is that before I measured this out on the scale, I did a scant cup of flour in this bowl, and look at how jail, not where you trap people, but like where you can play games. Anyway, my point with this is that I measured out a scant cup, and look at how much flour I have left over. This is why I'm really driving home that you need the kitchen scale, because your measurements will most likely be off. Go ahead and get your water measured out to 113 grams of room temperature water. Now that you have that all measured out, retrieve your starter and begin adding the ingredients. Then get it all mixed up. Once you have it all mixed up, replace the lid and put it back into its safe space for 24 more hours. Once we meet back here on day 3, we are going to begin feeding every 12 hours. So I'll see you then. Hello and welcome to day 3. As you can see, our starter has grown substantially. She is just sprouting right up, and I will tell you, it's starting to smell more fruity. It's starting to smell more acidic, and frankly, it's starting to smell more like sourdough. As you can see, it's definitely got a different texture than it did on day 1 or even day 2. It's starting to adopt some of that sourdough starter texture, which is a good thing. So what we're going to do is take it over here and we're going to remove 113 grams of this existing starter, discard it, and then replace it with fresh flour and fresh water. Now that she's fed, we're going to wait 12 hours and do the same thing again. Hello and welcome to day 12. So it took almost 2 weeks to get our starter ready, but it was well worth it. The reason that we just jumped ahead from day 8 to day 12 is because the look of her didn't really change that much over that time. The big difference was in the smell. With sourdough starter, you're looking for an assortment of different smells. You're looking for some fruitiness, also a little bit of an acidity, but not, and I repeat, not an acetone smell. Some starters may also smell a little bit meaty. However, it may take several weeks for it to get to that point. In fact, you may notice as you go on your sourdough journey that the smell evolves the older that the starter gets or the more mature. And with that, you'll see changes in the flavor of your bread. When you bake your very first loaf, you can expect for it to have a very fruity and tangy flavor. But several weeks down the road, even a month on, you may notice that it starts to adopt some meaty components, maybe like a steak or like sauteed mushrooms. Now at this point, once your starter is ready, go ahead and discard 113 grams, bake with it if you choose to, and then the remaining starter will be your mature starter that you will transfer into the refrigerator. Once your starter is mature and has been transferred into the refrigerator, you only have to feed it about once or twice a week. The good news is once you've transferred it into the fridge and you're only having to feed it once or twice a week, you're not throwing away starter every day. When you're ready to bake, pull it out. Pancakes, cookies, bagels, cakes, bread, the possibilities are endless. Get baking, y'all.